So I guess to get started with, I want to know how this started for you. Was film composition always kind of a goal of yours from a young age?
I learned about the importance of film music when I was very young, and my brother and I used to watch the scary movie nights in New York City on Channel 11. They had a show called Children's Theater, and we were watching a show, and I must have been about, I don't know, 8 or 9, and for some reason there was something incredibly terrifying on screen, and my brother and I were hiding behind the sofa, and my father walked over to the TV set and turned down the audio, and he said, "There's nothing to be scared of. It's just the music." And it was at that point that I realized there was something impactful and important about what was happening between the marriage of music and picture that I wanted to explore from then on. It wasn't exactly, I didn't go directly to the film scoring route. I made a few different alterations in my career path, but it was where I always wanted to end up.
Right. Well, you did work with various artists and bands. You worked with Suzanne Vega for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, for a while. That was almost 10 years, I guess. Maybe
Wow.
7 to 10 years with Suzanne. Yeah.
I'm a huge Suzanne Vega fan. So.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So am I.
So when was the well? I guess first of all, what I'd like to know, back to the film composition and your earliest kind of inspirations. What were those inspirations? Did you seek out film scores from specific composers and study them?
Yeah. Again, back when we were young, my father had a very limited record collection, but one of the most poignant records in our collection was the complete, well, up to that point, John Barry 007 stuff, a compilation he had of all the John Barry stuff, the 007, and that was another eye-opening experience. We loved that. We used to run around the apartment singing the down, 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 and that was probably that and the Nino Rota stuff and the Morricone stuff was my earliest understanding of film composition, and that's what caught my ear first.
Yeah.
I've become I wouldn't say an expert historian, but a huge fan of film music and the history of film music in general. So I've studied quite a lot. I seek out not only the recorded scores, but the printed scores, if possible, of a lot of different composers. I like to study them. It gives me a great deal of pleasure.
Well, I think about the various legendary composers, several of which you just mentioned, and I mean, I think about the specific sounds of John Barry. I mean, Bond is a very bold, aggressive score. You know, lots of orchestra and brass, and then I think about Morricone, and he's very versatile. But there's this haunting quality that runs through Morricone's best scores that are very specific to him. And I'm wondering, do you have a style, or is the kind of modus operandi to kind of disappear into whatever project you're working on?
Well, I think I've developed a personal style, and it's been primarily more by default than design. Just in that, for many years I worked on these low budget movies, and I had to create a score out of only instruments that I could play. So, because I was never a big fan on purely electronic scores. I always tried to have an organic quality. So I collected a lot of weird instruments that I sort of could figure out how to play, and they became things that I relied upon a lot. In any size score now that I work on, I will always refer back to some of these instruments. And I think the combination of that and maybe some, certain harmonic, melodic moves that I've gleaned from some of the masters that I like to incorporate into my own work, and maybe a combination of all that leads to some sort of style. I don't know. I hope so.
Well, you're a big fan of thematic scores. I mean, and I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think with the advent of electronics into the whole process, it's kind of taken away somewhat from those great themes.
I agree. I feel like a lot of electronic scores just merely rely on a texture, rather, to provide an emotional impact. And that's not to say that you can't get a lot of emotional impact from a texture. There's a lot you could do with just, a certain, different manipulation of the sound. But for something that's obviously memorable and implies a more emotional touchstone, there's nothing that's going to provide that, in my mind, beyond a theme or a strong melody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And tell me what, in your view, is the role of a film score? Because we often hear criticisms of film scores that they overpower what we're seeing on screen, or they dictate exactly how we're supposed to feel. They do the work for us. Is that an unfair criticism of some scores, do you think? Or
sometimes. I feel in response to your first question that my job is really to just help the director tell his story in whatever way he feels appropriate, whether that be by a huge orchestra playing a big theme and it's very loud in the mix, or by something that's barely audible. It really depends on the particular project and the requirements of the film and the director. So there is no one specific answer to that.
Yeah.
And I know that sometimes I hear films and I think that the score is not strong, and I don't always blame the composer, because I know it's a collaborative process, and I know sometimes you have to make you have to choose your battles wisely, and sometimes maybe not they're not won in the way that you wish.
Do you find that the best directors have a musical sense, though, that they're able to communicate with you in that kind of way?
I've had directors who are extremely musical and knew a lot about music, like John Cameron Mitchell, and I know I've worked with directors who are very free with their direction, like Jonathan Demme, and they're both great. I think what's most important is that the creative process is respected. I don't think it matters what background you come from. I think it just matters that you are, like I said, respectful of the process to get there. And, after that, that's all that matters to me.
Mm-hmm. And how early do
I like it better if someone who says to me, I want to feel more and feel an emotional quality here, rather than this should be played in a clarinet in the key of B flat. So, obviously, but, they both have their merits.
Yeah. Tell me when you typically, if an ideal for you, when you would come onto a project, would it be in the pre-production phase?
Well, it's very hard to write music to a script, although I love to be involved at that stage. I can't write music to a script, but at least I know what's going on with the project. And then, ideally, I like to come on. If I'm hired at that point, at least I could start thinking about it. But for the most part, it seems that these days I get hired at the rough assembly stage or close to a fine cut, and that seems to be about the norm. Sometimes it's a lot worse. Sometimes you only get 2 weeks, but 6 weeks seems to be about the average. That's fine with me.
You've done a couple of scores in the horror genre. The latest one, The Possession, included in that, kind of a horror thriller. And I love your score for The Possession. And part of what I love about it is that it's quite unexpected. There's kind of a reliance from the beginning on a solo piano sound, and I thought that was a very bold choice for this particular genre.
Well, when I first got the job, Ole, the director, had said to me that this is going to be. The first thing he said to me was that this is going to be a quiet film, and then I wasn't quite sure what he meant, but I thought that sounded very exciting and intriguing. And then he went on to describe it as more of a, he saw the whole film as more of a family drama, and we were exploring the intimate emotions of this particular family and the struggles they're going through in the aftermath of divorce. So that is what the foundation for the whole score came from, and that's why we start with an intimate instrument like the piano. And so I'm glad you responded to that, and that's what you noticed that. So, and that's what the genesis of that whole idea was.
Yeah, it's terrific. It's terrific. And do you kind of I don't know if you've had to deal with this or not, but when directors come to you, sometimes do they come to you with a preconceived notion of what the music should be, and does that ever run counter to your particular instincts for that material?
Sometimes, but I'm willing to explore anything, and sometimes it will be very counter to what I expect and what my initial idea would be, and I am often pleasantly surprised. And I don't know, did you get a chance to see The Possession over the weekend? I could tell you one scene where that was.
I did, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so there's a scene where the girl runs away after she has a fight with her father. Her father is throwing away the box, and she runs away in the middle of the night, and then her father chases after her and is looking for her. And the original temp for that, before Oleg really started fooling around with it, was a very traditional girl running through the night temp kind of score with percussion and dark strings and dun dun dun, that kind of stuff. And I thought that was a fine response to that scene. It was expected, but Oleg did something that was very unexpected there. He took all the natural sound out, except for every once in a while you hear the father calling out M, and it's got a lot of reverb, and it's way in the distance, and you don't hear anything else, and the score is blaring, and the score, he referred a lot to Throbbing Gristle for this particular scene. That was the band he kept referring to. And I ended up playing the score on this gigantic, I have this like 4-foot long, sort of like a lap steel, if you know what a lap steel is. It's like a guitar you would play on your lap, only it's strung with bass piano strings, and I play the strings with a big peanut butter jar on my left hand, rolling up and down the strings. So that's part of it, and then the other part I'm playing a rhythm on a Hungarian cimbalum, and that's not, that was purely by Ole's direction that I ended up there. So yes, there's an example.
Wow. Well, I'm also thinking about the use of temp scores, and we interview quite a few composers for this show because we're crazy about film score, and they talk about the idea of temp scores and how that can be a crutch, because I guess the director's trying to tell you he wants that particular kind of feel for a given scene, but
right.
You don't want to evoke that too closely. I mean, you want your own personal voice to come through.
Right. The thing about a temp score is it provides a marvelous shorthand. I mean, you're trying to have this very complicated conversation with somebody who you just met often about something that's very ethereal. It's very it's very hard to get your fingers around. It's hard to grasp the idea of what music is and how it's providing an emotional impact and what it's supposed to do. So, a temp score provides something you can at least talk about. If I have enough time, when I first start working with a director, I will just sit down with them and bring a whole bunch of music from my own library, from other composers, from other film scores, and just have other stuff to talk about, just so we have a broader base to draw from. And then, that being said, again, it all relies on the self-confidence of the director, how self-confident they are in the choice in me or whoever as a composer to do the right thing. And that varies from director to director. When you're working on a great project with a great director, you can use the temp score. It's just, as a reference point, and then as a jumping off point, saying, okay, I see what's working here, I see what's not working here, and I'll throw it out and move on. That's the best, possible experience. The worst possible experience is they ask you to ape it so closely that you feel like you're, soiling yourself. Doing something that's so incredibly wrong. But that doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, I want to ask you about two other projects on your resume because I was a huge fan of Big Love as well, and you came in on the last 2 seasons of that, correct?
Last 3 seasons.
Okay, so but when a show has already kind of established an identity, and I guess that carries over into the musical voice of the show, Was that a challenging notion for you?
Well, I knew that, they'd already gone through two composers before me, so I already knew that obviously they weren't happy with what was happening earlier. So I didn't feel like I had to pay too much attention to it. I mean, I obviously watched everything before I got hired. I knew every episode. I knew all the character arcs, but I did not, felt like I needed to be confined. As a matter of fact, I felt like I should, just listen to what was there and take it with a grain of salt. So to get that job, I had to make some fairly elaborate demos, to get Big Love, and I just did what they gave me. They just said, here's the scene, this is what's happening, and we need to feel X. That's the kind of direction I love to get. We need to feel X, whatever way you think possible. And I did some demos, and all the demos became, very important pieces of music that have been referred to throughout the whole seasons, the 3 seasons that I worked on the show. So thank you for that. I'm glad that worked.
It absolutely did work, because I would frequently think about how great the scoring was in Big Love. I mean, it was a top class show all the way anyway, but the scoring in particular was always great. And also, you've done a few documentary works, and do different rules apply? Does a different approach apply to documentary, the narrative, or is it all the same kind of journey for you?
A documentary is very different, and they're surprisingly difficult to score, because you're dealing with talking heads or there's narration a lot of the time. I mean, it depends on what kind of. I mean, I did that National Geographic thing, and that was a 7-part series, and that was wall-to-wall music, and that's a little bit different from your traditional documentary, because in that type of a nature documentary, you're providing the emotions of the animals that people want to humanize them with. So when the animal dies, it's a very tragic moment, and when the animal gives birth, it's a very celebratory moment. I don't know if the animals are really feeling that way, but that's the way we as humans view it. Also, there's more room in a nature-type documentary to be more bigger sounding, for lack of a better word. When you're doing something that's a talking head type documentary, you really almost have to stay in the background a lot of the way. You can't be overly melodic, but you still have to often provide the same emotional turns, and it can be very challenging. It's a very challenging medium to work in documentaries.
Well, I can imagine too in any project that when you're spotting, I guess that's the term for it, where to put your music. It's just as important to know where not to put music sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. That's just super, super critical.
Yeah. Well, is there a particular genre that you're anxious to explore?
Well, one of the reasons I got into film music is because you get to explore so many different genres, and the field is so deep. And it's just, music writing in general, it goes on forever. I mean, the whole history of music, it's just so incredibly profound, and I love that. It's like doing 400 crossword puzzles every day. It's all about just endless research and study, and I'm a big fan of that. I find it very satisfying. So I enjoy them all. I think I might have a slight special love for doing this horror thriller type, specifically horror music, and specifically if it's in a great movie like Obsession, it's a very high level thing. You get to do some really interesting, hopefully, work. You get to explore different modalities and different orchestrations that you don't always get to do in a romantic comedy.
Right. Yeah, and it does seem by its very nature kind of a more theatrical canvas to play on too.
It is. It's exactly that. It's bigger, it's bolder, it's more theatrical, and you can step out of the box a little bit more.
Yeah. So before I let you go, I always ask this of any composer we speak to. I want to know from you, like 3 to 5 scores that you consider the essentials, like the must-haves in your library.
Oh, I don't know. I would say maybe Goldfinger, Juliet of the Spirits, Once Upon a Time in the West. Let's see. I like Charade, Mancini's Charade. That's fantastic. That was one of my favorites when I was a kid. How many did I say that way? Let's say you gotta have Psycho. I mean, Cape Fear. You know, any of the Bernard Herrmann stuff, especially with Hitchcock. But all of his work is brilliant. And,
well, didn't I read that Cape Fear was a particular inspiration for you with some aspects of possession?
Yes, Cape Fear was a specific, specific one for me because the way the brass and that line is so powerful and terrifying, I really wanted to try and achieve something. You know, if I could get something that was a tenth that good, I'd be really happy. So I listened to that a lot because I especially the re-recording, the re-orchestration, re-recording that Elmer Bernstein did for the Scorsese version. That was just, I mean, you could really hear it there. I mean, in the original version, it's a little, it's not as bold.
Oh, you hear those four notes and you feel doom. I mean, the doom is...
No, something... he just... Bernard Herrmann could do so much with such an incredible economy of means. I mean, just like 2 notes, 3 notes. He could do it, and it was just amazing what that guy thought.